It's hard to imagine catching a 200-pound seal without a boat, without a gun, and with barely a sound. But that's exactly what I went out on the ice to witness. The Arctic wind bit through my layers, numbing my toes as I followed a group of Inuit hunters across a stark, frozen landscape. What they showed me was not what I had expected. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It was quiet, ancient, and it worked. We weren't even looking for seals at first, not directly anyway. "We look for ooh," said one of the older hunters, pointing at a seemingly blank patch of ice. I stared, confused, until he knelt down and brushed aside a layer of snow. Beneath it was a tiny hole, just about the size of my fist. That hole, he explained, was a breathing hole. To a seal trapped beneath layers of ice, it was life itself. Without these holes, seals would drown. They punched them through the ice with their claws and returned to them regularly to breathe. But spotting one of these holes isn't easy. The Arctic landscape is vast, flat, and blindingly white. I saw nothing but snow. The hunters, however, moved confidently. They pointed to places I would have walked past, saying, "A glue there," identifying what to me looked like plain ice. "I've been staring at ice for an hour, and all I found is more ice," I joked. The hunters smiled but said nothing. They had clearly heard that before, from every outsider who had ever tried to follow their methods. It took me a while, but after closely watching how they scanned the ground, I began to understand what they were seeing. The edges of a real breathing hole are slightly frosted, marked by the seal's warm breath condensing in the cold air. Sometimes there's a faint bump, a soft discoloration, or even a barely noticeable difference in how the snow sits. They even touch the ice with their bare hands, feeling for subtle warmth. One hunter explained that seals often maintain 5 to 7 breathing holes spread across their territory. If danger approaches one, they escape through another. It's a system designed by nature for survival. And to these hunters, every bump and breath mark told a story. Eventually, I thought I found one myself. I pointed excitedly. The hunter gave it a glance and shook his head. "Just ice crack." After my third wrong guess, I saw a hunter suddenly drop to the ground by a spot I would have completely missed. Without a word, he nodded to the others. He had found a real one. That's when everything changed. Now came the silence. No one told me to be quiet. They just stopped speaking. The hunter lay flat on his stomach, ear just inches from the hole, body still as stone. Others spread out, doing the same over different holes. I awkwardly copied them, pressing my ear near the ice. At first, I heard nothing, just the wind and my own impatient thoughts. Then, a sound, faint and fleeting. Tiny bubbles popping as they reached the surface. This, the hunter beside me confirmed with a small nod, was what they had been listening for. Seals can stay underwater for 15 minutes at a time. When they do come up, it might be just for 2 quick breaths, miss them, and you're stuck waiting another hour. I tried to wait, but my patience didn't match theirs. I checked my watch every 15 seconds. 5 minutes and 23 seconds in, I gave up. The hunters hadn't moved an inch. What I was learning out there on the ice wasn't just a method of hunting. It was a masterclass in focus, patience, and intuition. A quiet art shaped by centuries of survival. If you're enjoying this video, hit that red subscribe button. It's free, quick, and helps YouTube share our content with others who love this too. Your support really helps the channel grow. Hours slipped by, though the hunters didn't seem to notice. The cold had long since sunk through my boots, turning my feet into ice blocks. My muscles twitched involuntarily from trying to stay still, and every breath sent a puff of steam into the frozen air. I was certain nothing would come, but then, everything changed. A splash. A soft exhale. The sound echoed faintly from the breathing hole beside the oldest hunter. Suddenly the air around us was electric. No one moved, but everyone was alert. I held my breath as the hunter's hand tightened around his weapon. A strange 3-pronged spear I hadn't paid much attention to before. Only now did I realize how important it was. He struck, with a sudden burst of speed and force that startled me. His arm shot downward, driving the spear, called a kakivak, through the hole. Water sprayed upward as he twisted the shaft sharply, anchoring the prongs deep. There were no shouts, no celebration, just silence, focus, and strength. Inuit hunting, I was learning, was not theatrical. It was intentional, efficient, deadly. The kakivak itself looked simple, just a wooden shaft with 3 pointed ends, but it had been perfected through generations. The center prong pierced the seal directly, while the 2 outer prongs had reverse-facing barbs. These clever hooks allowed the spear to slide in easily, but made it almost impossible for the animal to escape once hit. But spearing the seal was only half the battle. Without a way to keep the heavy animal from slipping back under the ice, even a perfect strike could end in failure. That's when I saw another hunter reach for what looked like a deflated balloon, wrinkled and tan, made from animal skin. "Quick, the Avat!" the first hunter called. The float was passed to him, a traditional tool just as vital as the kakavak. Made from dried and cleaned seal skin, the Avat was designed to help prevent a speared seal from sinking. With practiced movements, one hunter tied the float's sinew line to the shaft of the spear, while the other maintained a firm grip on his catch below the ice. The water trembled as the seal struggled. I hadn't realized just how strong these animals were. A full-grown seal can weigh over 200 pounds, and in its panic, it thrashes with terrifying force. Still, the hunters stayed calm. One of them blew into the float's opening, inflating it rapidly until it was about the size of a basketball. He sealed it shut with a twist and a bone toggle, then nodded. Now they could loosen their grip slightly. The Avat would do its job, its buoyancy counteracting the animal's strength and weight, keeping it from sinking and keeping the spear from being lost. Eager to help, I asked if there was anything I could do. A hunter handed me a rope with a serious look. I pulled, expecting resistance, and nearly fell backward when it came up slack. Laughter followed. "First job," one said with a grin. I laughed too, embarrassed, but thrilled to be included. What struck me more than anything was the elegant simplicity of it all. No motors, no modern gear, just wood, sinew, and skin, combined with centuries of experience. The Avat wasn't just a float, it was an ingenious solution to a serious risk, proof of how deeply adapted Inuit hunters are to this unforgiving land. With the seal secured and no danger of it slipping away, the next task was clear. The breathing hole, no more than 8 inches wide, was far too small to pull out a full-grown seal. And so, the real labor began. Pulling a 200-pound seal through an 8-inch wide hole is like trying to drag a watermelon through a keyhole. It's not going to happen without effort, and lots of it. With the seal now tethered and floating just beneath the ice, the hunters got to work. The oldest among them pulled out a tool that looked like a hybrid between an ice pick and a chisel. With powerful rhythmic strokes, he began chipping away at the frozen edge of the breathing hole, small shards of ice scattered with each strike. I knelt beside him and watched as the hole slowly expanded, wide enough for arms to fit through, then shoulders. This tool, I was told, had once been made from caribou antler or walrus tusk. These materials were strong enough to crack through ice several feet thick. Though today some hunters use steel, the shape and design remained unchanged, because it worked. Once the hole was widened enough, the hunters prepared the next step. From a rolled-up bundle, they pulled a rope made from braided seal skin, tough, water-resistant, and reliable. They looped one end around the shaft of the kakavak, securing it tightly where the spear met the seal's body. Then one hunter turned to me, grinning, and said, "Your turn." He handed me the rope. I took it eagerly, thinking of all the hours I'd spent in the gym, lifting weights and training. But Arctic ice doesn't care about your workout routine. 30 seconds in, my arms were on fire, my shoulders screaming. The rope hadn't budged an inch. The hunters chuckled as they gently took it back. They didn't pull the way I had, clumsily and with just their arms. They used their whole bodies. Wrapping the rope around their waists, leaning backward, and even walking slowly away from the hole, they turned their own weight into leverage. One hunter anchored the line around a small ice post they had planted in the snow, creating an improvised winch. With 3 men pulling together, the seal began to emerge. The first part we saw was the head, glistening wet and heavy with the weight of water. Steam rose from its body as it met the freezing air. Blood and water mingled on the surface, forming dark puddles on the white ice. Still, no one cheered. No high fives. No boasting. Only more movement. More work. The hunters heaved until the entire seal was on the surface, laid across wooden slats. Even then, the atmosphere remained focused. This wasn't a moment for celebration. It was a moment for respect and preparation. Because although the seal was out, the real work was just beginning. A shrill whistle cut through the wind. Moments later, a team of Inuit sled dogs appeared on the horizon. Muscular, wolf-like, and silent, they trotted confidently across the ice, pulling behind them a traditional wooden sled, the kamikit. It had no nails or metal parts, only wood and rope. In Arctic temperatures, metal grows brittle and fails. Rope bindings, on the other hand, flex and hold. The lead hunter barked sharp commands in Inuktitut. The dogs responded instantly. No reins, no leashes, just tone and experience. As they approached, the sled glided silently to a stop beside the catch. The hunters hoisted the heavy seal onto the wooden platform and secured it with ropes. I noticed something strange. The dogs didn't even glance at the fresh meat. I asked if they ever tried to steal it. "Only once," one hunter said, without elaborating. With the sled loaded, the hunters didn't hop on. They walked beside it. Even with 8 powerful dogs, adding human weight to a load already bearing a seal would be a needless strain. So, in near silence, we began the slow journey back to the community, pulling more than just a seal behind us. We were bringing back nourishment, tradition, and a story as old as the land itself. As we approached the cluster of snow-covered homes, it became clear that word of our success had spread fast. People were already gathering near one of the houses, standing quietly but expectantly. The sled came to a stop just outside the village, and the hunters began clearing a flat space on the ice. No fanfare, no speeches, just quiet, practiced motion. One of them pulled out a curved blade, unlike anything I had seen before. It looked small in his hand but held with reverence. This was an ulu, a traditional Inuit knife with a semicircular blade and a handle on top, designed for a smooth rocking motion. It's a tool passed from grandmother to granddaughter, worn down not from misuse, but from generations of careful, skilled work. The seal was laid out, and the butchering began. Despite the cold in their bare hands, the hunters worked quickly, but never rushed. The ulu moved with precision, making a clean slice along the seal's belly. The skin was peeled back in one large sheet, carefully separated from the thick blubber beneath. That skin wouldn't be discarded. It would be cleaned, cured, and eventually transformed into clothing or hunting gear. Then came the blubber, the insulating fat that keeps seals warm through freezing waters. In the dead of Arctic winter, this layer can be up to 4 inches thick. Calorie-rich and dense, it's among the most valuable parts of the animal. As I watched strips being cut, I awkwardly stepped back and unknowingly placed my boot on a small piece of meat. The oldest hunter looked at my foot, then back at me. "That's fine," he said dryly. "We needed someone to tenderize that part anyway." Laughter rippled through the group as I quickly shuffled away. Each cut had a purpose. Organs were removed with care. The liver, heart, kidneys, all set aside in tidy piles. Nothing was wasted. Even the blood was poured into containers for soup. Despite working on the ground with no cutting boards, tables, or modern tools, the process was remarkably clean. There was no panic, no confusion, just a kind of synchronized rhythm. As the seal was divided, I noticed that not all the meat was going into storage. A substantial portion was being set aside in a separate pile. Curious, I asked one of the hunters, "What happens to that?" "That goes to others," he said. "Everyone gets some." This wasn't charity, it was tradition. Elders received the first shares, liver, kidneys, and other choice cuts, wrapped and hand-delivered without a word. Then came families without hunters. A widow and her children were quietly given a generous share. No one asked, no one kept track. There was no announcement, yet everyone seemed to know who should receive what. I commented on the generosity. One hunter looked confused. "It's not generous," he said simply. "It's how we live. Her husband would have done the same for my family." In this Arctic community, food sharing functions like a mutual insurance policy. Today's lucky hunter might return empty-handed tomorrow, but by sharing today, they secure help in times of need. There is no system of IOUs, only trust and understanding passed down through generations. "Do you ever keep the best parts for yourselves?" I asked, half joking. The group burst into laughter. "We're not you," one replied with a smirk. I wasn't sure if that was a compliment or not, but I laughed along with them anyway. There was no weighing, no distribution chart, just intuition and memory. This wasn't disorganized giving. It was an unwritten code, deeply rooted and universally respected. As the last cut was handed out, I realized I wasn't just watching the aftermath of a successful hunt. I was witnessing an entire philosophy of survival, one that binds people together stronger than any rope. With the seal now butchered and most of the meat divided, the remaining cuts were carefully organized for storage. I followed the hunters as they carried bundles of meat across the snow to a set of small, snow-covered pits. Some shallow, some dug deep into the earth. These weren't random holes. Each one had a purpose. "This one for next week," a hunter said, pointing to a shallow pit. "This one for winter." He gestured toward another, deeper hole. These were the community's natural freezers, carved into the permafrost, the permanently frozen ground beneath the snow. Meat stored here could remain safely preserved for months, even years, without a hint of spoilage. Hunters wrapped cuts in sealskins, layered them on raised platforms, then covered everything with more skins and a thick layer of snow. It kept scavengers away and let the cold do its work. In fact, I was told of an elder who once forgot about a cache of seal meat for over 2 years. When he finally uncovered it, the meat was still good. "Try that with store-bought beef," a hunter laughed. These storage methods weren't just effective, they were brilliant. In a place where electricity isn't always reliable and temperatures can drop below -40 degrees, modern refrigeration is no match for the environment itself. The land was their freezer, their pantry, their kitchen. Not all of the meat was frozen immediately, though. Some cuts were set aside for deliberate fermentation. The hunters showed me a few wrapped portions, stored differently, destined to become iguanak, a traditional dish made from fermented seal meat. The smell, they admitted, was strong. Very strong. Outsiders often find it difficult to even stand near it, let alone taste it. But to the Inuit, it's considered delicious, a delicacy rooted in both necessity and tradition. "What about refrigeration now?" I asked. "Don't most people have freezers?" "Some do," one hunter said with a shrug, "but many still prefer the old ways. No electricity, no machine, just the Arctic." As I watched the process, it struck me how carefully everything was planned. Cuts meant for next week went into shallow pits, easy to reach. Meat for deep winter, when travel might be impossible, was buried deeper. Everything had a reason, a pattern, a memory attached to it. By the time the last pit was covered, snow flattened and packed on top, the sun had started to dip below the horizon. The hunters stood quietly, brushing the snow from their hands. Nothing was left on the ground. No scraps, no bones, no mess. It was as if the seal had simply vanished, transformed into meals, warmth, tools, and tradition. I had watched animals be hunted before, but never like this. Here, it wasn't about the kill. It was about balance, between survival and respect, between tradition and the harshness of the Arctic. Every part of the seal was used. Every action had a purpose, and every person had a role. As we walked back toward the houses, I realized that I hadn't just observed how food was stored. I had witnessed how knowledge survives. There were no instruction manuals, no written recipes, no checklists, only practiced hands, shared effort, and lessons passed quietly from one generation to the next. That night, as the temperature dropped and the stars emerged, the community grew still. But inside the homes, people were already preparing pieces of the seal we had brought back. And what I was about to experience would go far beyond taste. Not in movement, but in meaning. I sat inside a modest home warmed by both body heat and the quiet buzz of conversation. Around me, families worked with calm efficiency, each person preparing a different part of the animal we had brought in hours earlier. There was no waste. Not a single piece was left unused. Strips of meat were sliced and laid out for drying or cooked right away for dinner. Blubber, pale and thick, was chopped into bite-sized cubes that children popped into their mouths like candy. Bones were rinsed and set aside, for tools, for soup, for whatever use they could still offer. Even the eyes were carefully handled. My host offered me one with a kind smile. I smiled back and politely declined. Some Arctic delicacies require more courage than I had brought with me. I pointed to a strange organ, something I couldn't identify. "What about this part?" I asked. "That goes to the youngest hunter's grandmother," my host said. Then, with a chuckle, "Unless you really want it." I shook my head. There was something sacred about how everything had its place, its story. its rightful recipient. No one here needed to ask where things went. They already knew. "Do you ever throw anything away?" I asked, not intending offense, just curiosity. The room grew quiet for a moment, not with discomfort, but confusion. My host looked at me like I had asked whether they ever breathed less in winter. "Why would we?" he finally said. "In this place, nothing is easy. Everything is earned." That sentence stayed with me. In the Arctic, waste isn't just frowned upon. It's unthinkable. Every resource is precious. Every seal, caribou, or fish represents hours of work, cooperation, and more than anything, survival. When I finally tasted the seal meat, cooked simply, served without ceremony, I expected something foreign, but what I tasted was something far more complex. It was the story of the hunt, the hours of silence on the ice, the moment of the strike, the careful preservation, the sharing, the laughter, and the memory of being included in it all. This wasn't just food, it was identity, connection, a thread stretching back through centuries, woven from patience, resilience, and respect. I had come to learn how people survive in a frozen land. What I found was that survival isn't just about food or shelter. It's about community, about handing the best cut of meat to a neighbor before feeding yourself, about wrapping meat in snow and skins, not just for storage, but to honor the life that was taken. Outsiders often see this place as desolate, but to those who call it home, the Arctic is alive, with tradition, knowledge, and an unshakable bond between land and people. As I stepped outside later that night, I looked up at the stars above the vast white expanse. Somewhere out there, more breathing holes were forming in the ice. More hunters were waiting in silence. And somewhere beneath the surface, seals were swimming through the dark, returning to the same tiny holes they had always known. Life here doesn't just go on, it endures.